Right. Thanks, everyone, for coming to this session. Yeah, please. So my name is Karthik Thumula. I'm the Principal Technical Marketing Engineer from Palo Alto Networks. I know the title sounds a bit fancy, but at the end of the day, I'm the subject matter expert on industrial OT security in Palo Alto. So in this particular session, we'll talk about how we can secure using zero trust within the ICS core. Mainly the strategies what we need to secure using zero trust within the ICS core. So if you see within the critical infrastructure, right, we have seen within the last 3 to 5 years especially, the ransomware is on rise, right? The critical infrastructure is being targeted. And we are talking about like the Saudi Arabian oil refinery attack is one good example. And within US, like the Colonial Pipeline attack is one. And within the manufacturing, mainly the food manufacturing, JBS is one good example where the critical infrastructure is being targeted using these ransomware attacks. And what we need is a zero trust approach to secure the critical infrastructure, right? I know when you talk about zero trust, it's a fancy word. We will argue like whether it's applicable for OT security or not, and we'll talk about all that principles within this particular session, right? How using zero trust we can secure the critical infrastructure to provide security and reduce the downtime. We'll talk about all that within this particular session. So within the security landscape for OT, we have seen the threat landscape within the OT has been evolved, right? Like mainly in the last 3 to 5 years, like I mentioned, we have seen the malware attacks, the ransomware attacks. And some of the trends, what we have observed, the major one is lack of visibility. Every time when I go and talk to like a NetSec administrators, they say, buddy, I don't have any clue about my OT devices, right? So that's the first thing they say. Typically, the OT operators and OT specialists have visibility of these OT devices. NetSec is pretty much blinded in terms of OT visibility. And that's where, because of lack of visibility, we are leading to this compliance gap and security and ransomware attacks, right? So you can't protect any network which you can't see. So one of the major challenge is lack of visibility within the OT environment. And the other trend, what we have observed is, though we say OT is predominantly more contained, especially within the level 0 to 2, but oftentimes we see the critical infrastructure specialists or the OT operators for some kind of a patch download or some kind of firmware download, they open these backdoors, right? Like unsanctioned internet connections. Using that unsanctioned internet connections, we have seen one good example, the Florida water pipeline attack, right? If you don't have a good segmentation strategy, then like in this example where the hacker could go using a team viewer application, they went into the system. Through that, they laterally moved into the OT network, went into the HMI, and from the HMI, they increased the sodium hydroxide level, right? So that's pretty catastrophic. And this is one good example. Because of these unsanctioned internet connections, though they are pretty contained, we have seen this time and time. And then the other example is mainly on the segmentation, right? Because of lack of segmentation, because of flat networks, we can clearly see the malware gets propagated from one device to another device, all the way from IDMZ to the deeper into the OT environments, right? We are talking about like regular malwares, buffer overflow execution, SQL injection, command injection, these kind of threats which are specific to IT devices, they get penetrated into the OT environments as well. And then there are some ICS-specific threats and attacks which we have observed. When we talk about ICS-specific threats and attacks, we are talking about cosmic energy, stucknets, right, ECANs. These are some cyber attacks which are specific to critical infrastructure. And we have observed those trends because of this prolonged uptime on these OT assets. These are pretty legacy, and right, you don't have any operational downtime, so you are not going to patch these devices often. So because of this, there are some trends mainly on the ICS-specific attacks. So overall, you need to have that consistent security service which can provide that visibility so that you can understand what those assets are, and then you need to have that comprehensive segmentation. So we are going to talk about all that in a bit, right? And if you look at any NIST guidelines, mainly NIST 827, the guidelines, what we have observed, 800-207. According to the NIST guidelines, there are 7 tenets, right? The main 7 tenets, I don't want to go into all these details, but like one of the major one is the access needs to be granted at per session level, right? You need to have some kind of a dynamic policy. You need to have authorization and authentication. Like these are some of the principles according to the NIST 800-27. And also, if you apply that to critical infrastructure, you can't have a true NIST framework for critical infrastructure. So you can't apply a zero trust in purest form, right? Mainly for OT. And that's where you need to take some of these things and you need to apply that to zero trust. And that's what we're going to do in this particular session. How we can take some of these things, what we have observed, and how we can apply that to zero trust, we're going to talk about that. And if you apply some of these into your OT environments, right, one of the major one is you need to have a true OT and IT segmentation. So if you look at the top 2 from level 5 to level 3.5, you need to secure your entire enterprise. You need to secure your cloud workloads. You need to secure your cloud apps using the true zero trust framework, right? So that's a major thing. And then if you come deeper into the OT environments, mainly from level 0 to level 2 and level 3, so we need to have that IDMZ level, which can provide that OT and IT segmentation. And then within this level 0 to level 2, using the IEC 62443 framework, we need to secure with zones, conduits, so that we can provide that true micro segmentation or true segmentation deeper into the OT environment. So if you look at the IEC 62443, they primarily talks about zones and conduits, right? So I want to quickly talk about what is a zone. What is a zone? Zone is basically a logical grouping of the physical assets, right? Like you take the physical assets like HMIs, PLCs, control systems, engineering workstations, and you group them together and you apply common security policies. When I talk about common security policies, these could be applied based on the financial requirements. These could be applied based on your business requirements. These could be applied based on your logical grouping. So you can apply any of these common security requirements per zone. And what is a conduit? Conduit is mainly any communication which happens between the zones, right? From zone 1 to zone 2, if there is some kind of a communication which is happening, like what are the transactional flows which happens between zone 1 to zone 2, that's a conduit. And these are some of the things which IEC 62443 talks about to apply this true zero trust framework. So what are the 5 steps journey according to the IEC 62443? The major one is define your define the protected surface, right? So what is a protected surface? It's mainly your OT assets. So you need to have the visibility of all your OT assets. That's the first thing. And then you need to map the transactional flows. That means any communication which is happening from the OT to the IT or anything which is happening between the OT environments, you need to have the transactional flows so that you have that baseline of information. And then the third step is you need to architect the zero trust network. Mainly, you need to create your zones, you need to create your conduits, you need to create that OT IT segmentation layer so that you can provide the true zero trust framework. And once you create the true zero trust framework, the next step is pushing that least privilege access policies. And here, you're not just going to write policies based on IP addresses or based on subnets, right? Like we are talking about policies which are being tied to the OT device context. When I say OT device context, I should have ability to write a policy for my HMI. So if my HMI goes from one zone to another zone, the policy would essentially follow the device. So that's what I'm talking about. Layer 7 application level policies which tie to the OT device context, not the regular policies which you typically write using IP addresses and subnets. So that's the creating the true zero trust policy. And then the last step is maintaining and monitoring your transactional flows, mainly understanding the threats, vulnerabilities, and send that information to your SOC analyst so that the SOC analyst can take this data and apply that and further patch these devices. So these are the 5 main steps which are pretty much aligned according to the IEC 62443 standard. right? So if you apply that into your OT network, this is what it looks like. This is your 5-step journey. The first one, the IT/OT segmentation. The second one is the visibility of your OT assets. The third one is pushing that least privilege access policies, right? And the fourth is detecting the threats, vulnerabilities, attacks, which are specific to the ICS environment. And fifth one is the incident response, right? So we're going to talk about all these 5 things, a more deeper dive in the next few slides. So the first one, mainly the IDMZ guidelines, right? So the main thing within the IDMZ level is you need to have a clear demarcation between your IT infrastructure and your OT infrastructure. So that can be done using your IDMZ. So you can place your firewall there, you can create your IDMZ network, which can provide the true segmentation between your IT infrastructure, which is your enterprise zone, and your manufacturing zone, which is your OT infrastructure. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt just quickly. Is the IDMZ also the demarcation point for cloud applications?
Yes, absolutely. Anything which is going out to the enterprise, including cloud, your IDMZ is the demarcation. Yeah, that's a great question, right? And also the data which traverses within the manufacturing zone, it should be within that network. That means if you have any disconnect within the IDMZ, you need to have the transactions which are the business operations which needs to be operated normally. So there shouldn't be any downtime if there is any network reachability errors from the IDMZ into the manufacturing zone, right? So see, these are some of the things which we have, which we recommend as far as IDMZ. And also in terms of threat services, you can see there are a bunch of threat services which you could implement at the IDMZ level, like threat prevention, wildfire, URL filtering, DNS security. These are some of the things which you could implement at the IDMZ level so that you can protect against any sophisticated threats and attacks.
Is that supposed to be showing something coming from essentially the enterprise network into the DMZ and then from the DMZ into the ICS network?
No, so there is some kind of communication like north-south communication which might happening from the manufacturing zone back into the IDMZ and going from the IDMZ network back into the cloud applications or enterprise zone.
No, the orange lines show something from the business network into the DMZ,
Right.
right below from the DMZ into the ICS.
Yeah, so from the IDMZ, so you have some kind of a remote access network, right? So some kind of like remote access where you can implement secure remote access from the IDMZ environment into the manufacturing zone. So that's what we are trying to showcase there. And then the next step is providing that true visibility, right? So that is where you need to understand entire OT infrastructure within the manufacturing zone. Not just providing the visibilities of like HMIs, PLCs, engineering workstations. Here we are talking about Purdue level visualization. All the way from level 0 to level 3, if you look at this particular diagram, you need to have that complete visibility, how this communication is happening across the Purdue levels, and what are the applications which are being used for that communication. All that information needs to be provided part of OT asset visibility. Not just it is saying like it is just a HMI. It's not going to provide any information, right? We know that that's a HMI, but like what that particular HMI is communicating with, whether it is communicating with engineering workstation, whether it is communicating with PLC, those are some of the things which we need to provide part of OT asset visibility. And then the next step is providing that endpoint protection software, because oftentimes what we see is like engineering workstations run like Microsoft Windows operating system, right? Like you can run endpoint protection software like EDR, XDR kind of things like agents within these network devices, these OT assets, so that you can clearly see if there are any threats or attacks which are happening. So you can secure our endpoints using that EDR and XDR solution. And then the third one is primarily the attack surface management, where if there are some kind of rogue devices within your manufacturing zone, so you can go and you can protect that by clearly creating that attack surface management by pushing this least privilege access policies. And also you can log and monitor your OT assets to see if there are any transactional flows, and you can secure those OT assets by sending that information to your SOC analyst. Right? And then the third one is mainly reducing the blast radius with effective segmentation. And this is where we can provide that virtual patching using segmentation, right? Like we can clearly see between the zones, you can clearly define your zones, zone 1 to zone 3, right, according to the IEC 62443 standards. And once you create the zones, any communication between the zones needs to be according to the least privilege access policy. So from zone 1 to zone 3, if there is a PLC which is being communicated to the HMI, that has to go through the least privilege access policy guide, right? Yeah. Yeah, so it depends on what kind of infrastructure you have. You can protect that using a firewall if your firewall is acting as a gateway, or you can protect that using your switch infrastructure if your switch is acting as a gateway. So there are a couple of ways. Using Palo Alto's networks, we can use our firewalls as a gateways, and we can protect that using inline. And a lot of our customers.
So you're not talking actually endpoint. PLC is not an endpoint where you're going to be enforcing these policies.
That is correct.
Probably part of an island.
Yes.
Where that island is actually the kind of implicit trust.
Yes, that is correct. The island is the implicit trust. Right? So you need to have the true effective segmentation policies according to the IEC 62443 standards. And then this is where I want to spend a couple more minutes. So you need to have more of like a contextual segmentation. Oftentimes when we talk to vendors, they say that, hey, when we talk about segmentation, we want to create policies based on IP address rules, right? No. If you look at this particular policy, I have a Siemens HMI, right? It is talking to the Siemens PLC device using S7 read application. So that granular you should go in terms of creating policies, right? So you need to create that clear contextual segmentation to apply the true zero trust or least privilege access policies. And we can effectively do that. Like once we do that, if the device moves from one zone to another zone or from one location to another location, the policy will essentially follow the device because it's pretty much you're decoupling the IP address to device context, right? On top of it, you can also apply role-based access control. That means like I can go and I can write a layer 7 policy saying that this user who is John can only access the Siemens HMI device, right? Using secure remote access and using that S7 read application. And on top of it, you can also attach security profiles so that if there are any ICS threats or attacks, you can go and you can eliminate that natively. So this is the contextual segmentation I was talking about. And if you can apply this true contextual segmentation across your OT infrastructure, you can scale and you can mitigate any zero-day threats or attacks, right? So in this example, if you see all the way from level 4 to level 3.5 and level 3, we can go and we can write that policies once you have the contextual segmentation saying that all my historians engineering workstation can be part of my level 3.5 or level 3. My level 2 control systems can only part of this control level 2 so that I can write my policies based on this OT device context. Yeah, sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, a couple parts, real. First of which, how do you actually get this granular context?
Yeah.
I mean, are you going in and you have O-Town created where it's flagged or tagged that it's a PCI or an HMI or whatever, and you're pulling from like an API call to your OT asset manager?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So
You've got a couple thousand PLCs.
yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. There are a couple of ways how we can provide visibility. So if you want to know more about that, you can come to our booth. But like before that, I want to quickly highlight using Palo Alto's offering, because this is a overall security architecture discussion, so I don't want to pitch our product, but using Palo Alto's visibility solution, which is industrial OT security, we can provide the visibility of all the OT assets, like the PLCs, HMI, using machine learning and AI. And once you apply that using machine learning, we can take that same OT context and we can apply the contextual segmentation using our NG firewall as a platform. So if you want to know more about that, yeah, you can come to our booth, we can show that. And also, I have a more...
Second part, if I could, real quick. So effectively, you're talking about hub and spoke through the ICS firewall. So multiple VLAN segmentations then? Otherwise, layer 2 traffic's not going to route up the firewall, and I don't understand how you can afford to.
Yeah, so there are some small form factors firewalls, ruggedized ones, which you could put deeper into the OT network. And the traffic will be inline or the VWire mode through which we can provide that.
You're talking about deploying a lot of small, like L2 firewalls.
Level 2 firewalls, which can provide that. Yeah, please stop by so you will know more context on that. And also I have a deeper dive session which talks about the architecture and all That's on Thursday if you want to know more about that. But this is what.
To what he's mentioning, right? One of the fundamental pieces for the concept of zero trust is identity, right?
Right.
So at this moment, what we're looking at is that we actually do not have a universal concept of identities, but more of like identity per item, or what is it that we are talking about here, or your context is your identity? What is the identity that you're using to make the decision in your policy?
Yeah, the identity is pretty much tied to the vendor make and model. So if you have like a PLC, we are talking about identity of a PLC based on the manufacturer, like a Siemens PLC versus like a PLC which is being manufactured by Rockwell versus Omron. And we can even go into the model level to identify those, because every specific vendor make and model have different set of applications, different set of vulnerabilities and CVEs. So that granular you need to go to identify that identity information. Right? And then the last one is primarily the threat detection and continuous monitoring. So that is where we can look into the OT processes, not just like pushing the ICS specific threat signatures, right? Like we need to go more deeper, saying that if there is a S7 application, I want to, and someone goes and issues like a S7 stop that can bring down that HMI or a PLC. So we need to have intelligence at the command level to identify the OT processes, and you need to mitigate any zero-day threats and attacks, right? And also you need to include security as part of your factory acceptance test and as well as your site acceptance test. You should always test, make sure all these sets are working as per the business requirements. And then how we can leverage all that information and send that to a SOC analyst, because I'm pretty sure your SOC analyst will be really pissed off. The reason why I say that is because you have massive amount of data here, like data which is coming from your network, data which is coming from your endpoint, your OT assets, your enterprise zone. All that information gets sent to the OT or IT SOC analyst. But it can't scale, right? So that is where you need to leverage the advanced technologies using AI and ML. Using AI and ML, we can take all this data, we can normalize them, and using that, we can provide more of like a proactive information which can empower the SOC analyst. So we can apply using AI and ML, take that intelligence and apply that to more of like a proactive policies, which would help the OT and IT SOC, mainly to mitigate any threats or vulnerabilities. Yeah.
So AI is useful only up to a certain point where you have trained AI with significant information and data that is relevant to your context.
Yes, that is correct.
So in this case, what is the data you're going to be training it with if you are just in the discovery mode, right? You're just discovering all this information.
Yep.
How are you going to profile what is actually okay and what is not okay?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we can do is we can have a baseline of information based on the data what our SOC analyst is gathering. Like you gather that information for good old like 7 days, 10 business days, and understand what is a normal baseline of all these OT applications. Once you identify the baseline, right, then you can push your contextual policies. So that is where you can use this information, you can understand that baseline, and once you understand that baseline, that is where you can't create that baseline using a manual approach. So you need to have some kind of an AI and ML technology which can provide that by analyzing the predictive behavior. Because every OT assets, if you look at it, these are purpose-built devices. If you have like a PLC, PLC always talks to the HMI. Let's say if the PLC is talking to some other IT application, that's a deviation from its normal behavior, right? So that is something which AI can provide based on the information what it gathers using that predictive analysis. So using AI and ML, we can provide that true analytics and automation, which we can't scale from the manual approach.
That's heavy computation right there.
Right, right. And, yeah, sorry.
One more question, Mike. So isn't all this predicated upon the idea that you've already gone the last mile, you've actually done that segmentation? Is there anything that you can deal with folks that are in this? I mean, most of us have very large networks, distribution networks, whatever, they're communicating layer 2, so very large, very flat VLANs.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing though is that everything has to have to route through that gateway of the firewall.
Right.
So, in effect, this would be kind of the final step. Is there any guidance you can give in order to get to that final step, like steps 1, 2, and 3?
Yep, absolutely. So if you want to know more about that, we have a session on Thursday. So we talk about all the architecture. So yeah, please stop by. I'll have the final slide where I'll say when that particular session is. I'll talk about that. And finally, if you apply the same principles within the zero trust environments, mainly within the operational technology, like this is what it looks like. These are our 5 pillars. The first pillar is the discovery of all your OT assets. So you can see we can identify and automate every device, and we can discover them within a single pane of glass. And we can understand all that information. And once we identify all your OT assets, the next step is understanding the behavior baseline, right? Across the Purdue levels, you can clearly see what is a normal behavior versus any anomalous behavior. Any deviation from its anomalous behavior, that's when we elevate the risk score of that particular device, right? So that is what the normal communication pattern and understanding the behavior baseline. And the third step is pushing that contextual segmentation, where you can decouple your IP address and push the policies based on the OT device context, right? So that's the third, which pretty much aligns you to the IEC 62443 standards. And the fourth step is continuous monitoring. Mainly, you monitor your OT assets, understand what are the processes which are being used, and if someone goes and issues like a PLC stop or something where you have that intelligence of reading the program download events, have the intelligence of reading the stop commands and the command level intelligence, which can help in creating more effective segmentation policies. So where you can do this continuous monitoring to mitigate any issues. Yeah. Sorry.
How many false positives and false negatives do you get in a deployment case?
In terms of visibility?
In terms of visibility, because what you're doing is basically monitoring what is going on in your deployment 100% of the time and 100% of every transaction, right?
Right.
Any deviation is going to be an indicator of something that is an anomaly. You would probably have a threshold to say, okay, this is my tolerance to deviation or something like that. Wondering what is the amount of false positives that you might get or false negatives that you might get?
Yeah, I'm not saying like it will be like 100% accurate, but if you can create your right policies within your NG firewall, right, we can be like 99% accurate in terms of device discovery, at least based on what I have seen from.
The key for us is you got to give it time to bake. You've got to be able to catch up traffic, see what's talking to what, so that you don't start putting rules in place right in the process.
Your learning curve is going to be far more than 10 days or right?
Well, I mean, for the most traffic that's a regular operation, you'll get it in the first couple of weeks. It's going to be the monthly or quarterly interaction which you may not see, right? That you're going to have.
Or any change in your posture is going to also trigger some.
Yeah, I mean, the key thing to remember is what you're catching is what's going across from the outside to the inside, on the south and the south. That's ultimately what you're trying to get that policy in place to prevent that unnecessary communication, or undesired communication. Which that's where we're at right now with some of our sites.
Yeah.
Is Palo Alto 2-4 certified for 6443?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
And already your product's 4-2 or 4-1?
It's 4-1.
4-1.
Yeah.
Okay. So working towards 4-1.
Yes. Yep, and the final step is simplifying the operation. Like when I say simplifying the operation, you need to seamlessly integrate with your SOC analyst team, send the alerts, vulnerabilities, integrate with your existing security stack, have that common set of framework which can help mitigate threats and attacks and incident response information near real time, right? So these are the 5 steps mainly to protect your OT assets, starting from visibility, understanding the baseline, pushing the contextual segmentation, continuous monitoring to mitigate any cyber attacks and ICS-specific attacks, and simplifying the day-to-day operations of NetSec admins by integrating with their existing security stack, right? So if you want to know more about the Zero Trust and a more deeper dive, we do have a session on Thursday. Like I mentioned, please come to that session. So we'll talk about how you can leverage Palo Alto's industrial OT security solution to mitigate any zero-day attacks and threats, and how we can protect the critical infrastructure. And also, we do have a booth out there, so please stop by at our booth. You can see the demo and as well as the dashboard to see the visibility, right? So I hope this session is beneficial for you guys. Mainly, you can embark your zero trust journey using some of the principles I talked about today for the zero trust. So thanks again for coming this particular session. Thanks.
I did have one more quick question.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
this is, and you've got to answer this. I'm more than happy to stop this. So the ongoing industry, we're talking about ICS, or brokers, data hubs, et cetera. How do you map that against the whole zero trust model?
Yeah, sorry. I can,
We're going to take it off? All right.
yeah. Because
Does that make sense?
no, I didn't hear it.
Okay. So with Industry 4, you're talking about brokers, data hubs, all kinds of stuff that we don't